what does Max Verstappen really think of the Red Bull Ford project? And is it enough to keep him around after next year? Well, based on these tidbits, including his own takes, well, possibly. The final video of 2025 is about 2026, naturally. And one of the biggest off-season questions is whether the Red Bull-Ford Powertrains initiative has what it takes to challenge established manufacturers. Based on what we've heard this winter, since the season finished, the signs are looking quite promising, with Max Verstappen recently weighing in on the engine, more specifically the sound, and he likes it, even though he admits that it was on the dyno and not actually in a full car setup. It's still a good sign though. Who cares what an engine sounds like? Well, may I remind you what happened in 2014 when we were aghast at every single engine sounding like a vacuum cleaner, and the 2014 Ferrari of that year actually looking like one. But the engine note can telegraph a lot to the driver in terms of when to change gear and the overall status. And it's really quite positive for any Red Bull fan, considering how skeptical and dismissive Max has been regarding the new regulations coming in for next season, whilst also at the same time, in a somewhat related way but not really, kind of situation he has with Mercedes regarding his GT3 racing contract. But up until recently, there had been really little going on the Ford side of things, other than basically Ford telling Max, please don't leave us, we're treating you as our god, we are building a statue, literally calling him a pillar of the organisation. You want to know something? A bold prediction of mine, a little bit in advance, because I will be making that video on Friday, so do subscribe to the channel for that when that comes out, is that I believe Max Verstappen will not be leaving Red Bull after 2026. And no, it's not down to the fact that Toto will just keep them around, Russell and Antonelli, for the fact they did really well and exceed expectations. It might be down to the simple fact that Max may just choose not to leave, liking what he is seeing and the way things are progressing. And even just so far, it's certainly looking a lot more pleasant and a lot more serene than it was in the Horner era, or at least toward the end of it. I can understand that some of you may think I've been swayed after recently visiting their campus for a video. That tour you can watch over here as offered to me by channel partner Castor, but I have been genuinely impressed with what's gone down over there since Laurent Mekies took over. I feel some sort of connection toward their mission in improving the overall look at Red Bull and being more technically minded, and it certainly helps that Laurent Mekies actually accepted my connection request over on LinkedIn. Yes, I do have a LinkedIn. It's a lot more important than you might think. But in all seriousness, there are so many uplifting little bits of news and articles and opinions regarding the Red Bull 4 Powertrains initiative that have actually given many people pause for thought, phone for thought, as to the destiny of Max Verstappen. That maybe that Powertrains project will actually be justifying its existence after all, instead of just being a pet project of Horner because he just got stinged by Renault one too many times and wanted to get back at that darn Cyril that beat Bull. I beat Bull, I'll beat you with my Red Bull. And it all began with that whole thing regarding engine compression limits. I know, sounds pretty sexy, right? So allow me to compress some of that information into a little bit of detail that I and you might be able to grasp. In essence, a higher compression limit ratio means more power. And what Red Bull and Mercedes have reportedly found is a way to achieve higher ratios while still meeting the FIA's mandated 16:1 cap when idle. That is clever engineering, folks, and not cheating. I've also left a link in the pinned comment as to a brilliant article from autoracing1.com, which explains how compression limits work in a way which might be a little bit dense, but it certainly gives you everything you need to know. It's a really good piece. And despite numerous protests from Ferrari and Audi and Honda, the FIA has taken a look at the situation, and even though the limits have changed, they still have deemed it legal. At least for now. But Ferrari has vowed to continue the fight for as long as possible to get some sort of change done instantaneously. But as of now, this little trick has managed to bestow upon the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull an extra 15 brake horsepower, at least in theory, which equates to around 0.3 of a second per lap, especially at a time when, according to various sources, every single Formula One team is struggling to get anywhere close to the new minimum weight limit for 2026. And considering that there is now an imposition as to how much colour you can have on a car, and you must have, they can't just rely on the good old-fashioned, oh, we'll just use bare carbon fibre technique as much as they did in 2022. They're going to have to find other ways to cut the carbs. And look, if you're brand new to the sport, just because a team or a power unit manufacturer comes up with a clever trick that gives them some sort of performance that the FIA didn't think about, that does not mean that they cheated. That being said, there may be clarifications from the FIA further down the line to prevent costs spiralling or the risk-reward balance tipping violently towards risk, as in it would become unsafe in which to progress any further. All the other teams can do right now is just rage against the system. It's a lot easier to just straight up complain and get something banned or at least limited considerably to the point of it being completely useless than having to just suck your teeth, grin and bear it, and just come up with your own version, and having to sink many more millions into a cost cap regime where you would really want to put those funds into something else. But the very fact that Red Bull is being lumped in with Mercedes, who everyone believes to be the favourites going into the new regulation cycle, means that, hey, this brand new initiative must be doing something right if they came up with it in a vacuum. It actually adds a little bit of credibility to the cause, which will only go down well with the Dutchman. And speaking of the cost cap, this is the first time that we have seen this kind of big engine revolution within those financial restrictions. So you can't just throw money at the problems, which Mercedes were able to do at a time when spending was unlimited effectively. So for Red Bull to be able to do this, and Mercedes admittedly, without having the means to just throw cash at something, means that they were able to get this through sheer efficiency alone. Clever engineering. Very well done, Red Bull. So taken together, the picture right now, just a few weeks before the first test, looks a lot less like, oh, Red Bull Ford are building an engine and having to pray, and a lot more like, hey, they've built a real power unit program here, and now they're just doing the boring and expensive stuff, the final 10%. It's certainly looking a lot more robust, especially when you hear what Ford Racing's Mark Rushbrook has to say, because it does shape my argument here, which I will share with you for your consideration, because this is pretty telling. Ahem. It's about drive, it's about power. Sorry, wrong artist. It's about power, performance, reliability, and then drivability. In terms of the timeline and the goals we set at the beginning of our program, we met them. In the last few months, the work has mostly gone into drivability and calibration. Some of it you can do with computer models, some of it in the lab, and some of it is done with drivers in the simulator. That's where the focus is now. But of course it doesn't really all come together until the car is on the track. That'll be an important day and an important week. Only then will we see if all the work of the past 3 years pays off. Now, this is not Mark Rushbrook from Ford saying, praise the Lord! It's actually quite rational, as in he's handed us right there a handy-dandy playlist as to what they've been going through as developing this engine. Cool! They're right at the end of it. Because the ordering matters too. His language pointing to an engine which is fundamentally behaving the way that they and Red Bull want it to. The remaining risk is whether it behaves the same way inside an actual car, and then get their drivers, Max, Isaac, Liam and Arvid, to dance on the throttle, tinker with the battery, within around a specific circuit. In this case, the Circuit de Catalunya. Basically, they built an engine that they trust enough to actually install on a car and not worry about it. I don't really see Ford being down in the dumps about this, nor do I see them acting delusionally here. They just sound like every single other manufacturer we've heard from in the moment. And what they're saying right here, as well as some of the other teams, is that whoever wins 2026 will be the team that faces the least amount of surprises. The more boring their season goes, the better it will be for them. And Milton Keynes right now, considering this their first time doing this sort of thing without any support from an outside manufacturer at all, this is actually quite surprising in a good way. So where does Max stand in all of this emotionally and strategically? Now, of course, I'm not a mind reader, but what we can do is look at all of the stuff he said in public and what he chooses to get involved in, as well as the kind of projects he historically respects. And on the surface, his reaction to the Red Bull Ford engine sound feels genuine, as well as the whole thing. It seemingly has passed his vibe check. Because if he were distancing himself from the team, his answers would be very clipped and vague and not sounding very much like Max answers. Instead, he seems to be fully involved. And even though, historically speaking, Max has a soft spot and will continue to have a soft spot with Honda, considering that they won 4 world championships together, it's quite safe to say that what's happening with Ford is getting off to a really good start. It seems like Max is at least a little bit excited to be getting involved with this storied company. And also, it's a much more symbiotic project than it was with Honda when they simply were a works partner and providing engines, whereas Ford and Red Bull, they're working like that. And one important thing to remember here is that even though Max and Honda had a lot of success together, when Max really needed them, Honda made the decision to walk away. It was them that wanted to break the Red Bull partnership whilst Max was trying to contend for his first world title run. Yes, they did ultimately stick around through their Honda Racing division, providing technical support through 2025, but it wasn't a full commitment, not like it was prior to 2021. It was more like ghosting with benefits, in my opinion. And then, of course, when the engine manufacturer realised that, oh dang, we actually made something good, we better get back in the sport, pronto. They chose to go with Aston Martin, a completely different entity. Max, quite frankly, would have been left with some sort of an emotional scar for Honda to be dropping him like that, only then somewhat healed by the fact that Honda did come good in the end and provide a little bit of success. And then, of course, water under the bridge and all of that stuff, but at the time, when Max really needed their help, and then Honda just went like, ah, and just, no, that would have left a mark. Ford hoping to have none of that and remaining true to the bitter end. And more importantly, F1's own site quotes team boss Laura Mekies that Max is giving a lot to projects outside of the car, as well as the car itself, being more involved than people assume, with then Ford already, as I mentioned earlier, calling them a key pillar of the whole widget. Everybody in that special engine building is determined in giving Max an engine that is actively using his feedback from the get-go, especially around the one thing that Rushbrook highlighted as the current focus: drivability, tailoring to exactly how he wants an engine to drive. And I know that there are 3 other drivers within the organization whose values and inputs are going to be taken into consideration, but based on prestige alone, Verstappen's words carry the most amount of weight. Of course they do. It's only natural. It is Red Bull Ford's mission to keep Max on board throughout the remainder of his contract. After 2028, it's in the lap of the gods, because it's going to become quite clear that whoever wins in 2026 will have the best brain on the grid, being able to manage a car at speed, engine management, electrical management, having to think of all of the stuff, power deployment, active aero, what have you, big brain time. So for somebody like Max to be this entrenched right now during the off-season, whilst most other drivers are busy finding a beach randomly somewhere and getting a little bit of a tan, as well as having one too many mince pies, then this could actually stand him in good stead. And also, if they're talking about drivability, have the Dutchman have the most trustworthy right foot on the entire grid, certainly right up there with everybody from the start. He'll make it work, even if it's not the fastest car, like we've seen this season under Mekies' watch. And this engine will be really, really important, folks, because this is not like 2022 when it was all about the aero. We're going back to the turbo hybrid era of old, where engine grunt was everything, and Mercedes really are looking forward to 2026, because this is back in their wheelhouse again, when they could make really stonkingly good engines and not worry too much about the aero. And going back to that compression limit thing for a second here, the fact that Red Bull was able to find something like this, given the fact they've only just started, means they're thinking like legacy engine manufacturers already. People they'd managed to poach from other teams and organizations, and ones that they already had being then promoted to more senior management roles, especially in the wake of many people surely leaving after Horner left. This could only really give Red Bull a little bit of hope for their medium to long-term future, certainly the short term. So okay, does this mean that Max is proud of what his team is doing? Well, I wouldn't say the word proud, I would say more like he respects what they are doing, that Max respects competency rather than just pure bluster and drama. And if he sees his team provide a power unit which is actually proving to be quite practical and actually getting under the skin of their rivals, then that can only be good. To cause this much controversy through a technical situation rather than, oh, he said that, oh, he said that, oh, she said that, oh! No, it's coming from the fact that Red Bull managed to find an extra bit of power. Nice. Would this discovery have happened under Christian Horner? Well, it's hard to say, but what you can say right now is that Red Bull would not be as peachy today if the previous leader was still in charge. There'd be a lot more unknowns and a far less happy Verstappen, who might have had to slog it out for the second half of 2025 with a car that may have ceased development entirely earlier on than they actually did, going all the way to the end, and most likely would have not ended up with any more wins to his name, whereas in this reality, he wound up with the most wins and poles of the season and only lost out on the championship by 2 points. And under Mekies, the lessons and methods gleaned from the rapid rise of last year's car can easily transfer to next year's car, as I mentioned in a previous video, because it's all about the things and processes that they learnt along the way in trying to get this car to come good, which it ultimately did. It was nowhere near the monster that was the RB20. All of the stuff they've gleaned from that, as well as anything they've tried to recalibrate with the simulator, relying more on driver feedback, because that is exactly what they did in the final third of the season, will only serve to improve what happens in the simulator and the wind tunnels that are coming online very soon, and will stand to improve the gains that they will find even more. So I reckon if Max is making a decision as to where he will hang his hat for the remainder of his Formula One career, it'll be at a place which is quietly led by engineers and not led by pantomime dames, which is the case Christian. Because what Christian was actually brilliant at worked in the past when you had a personality leading a team. But when you've got people who are more engineering led, who understand how hierarchies work, that sort of thing doesn't work anymore. You can easily imagine that Red Bull are just working on the fundamentals and getting this car right rather than trying to sell the story that they think they've got the fundamentals right. They want to know for sure. And right now, what we are hearing, they've actually got somewhere. But there is a practical thing to talk about the whole when Max will actually go and whether he'll choose to stay, because he does have his contract that runs through 2028. And there was all the talk about exit clauses regarding championship placement that we heard all about in 24 and 25. This kind of exit clause might be triggered in 2026 because they might actually be in a little bit of a stumbling block at the beginning. But ultimately, it will be Max's call as to whether or not he'll want to activate said clause. It's not an automatic sort of thing, at least I don't think. I didn't write the contract. It'll only make it easier in which to cut ties, not a surefire way of just getting out of there immediately and just abandoning the team. I would imagine that Max would want to make sure that that team is in a good place, which he can then hand off to either Isaac or Liam or Arvid or whoever ends up at that team. My best bet that maybe in 2029 it could be Carlos Sainz, but we'll save that spanner of speculation for another video, maybe in a couple of years. But okay, let's touch on Max's GT3 project, because it does matter more than you think. His team is stepping up to Mercedes AMG machinery for next year, and some headlines made it sound like he was switching F1 teams, which was, as Oscar would put it, cheeky. But the real story in all of this is that he is taking GT3 more seriously. That is what Max has been saying when he's actually been revealing the details. Everything worked really well in 2025 when it was more like a growing hobby project, but now it's serious. In GT World Challenge Europe, they are lifting themselves from the gold class of competition to the pro class, and this is all part of the plan. Not just to help, as Max said it, his buddy Chris Lullum to try and find his feet instead of just throwing him into the lines with the pros, but also to make sure that when he does eventually step away from Formula One, he actually has something to step into which is a viable project, which is right up there with the best, instead of having to start from scratch, ending up somewhere where he can actually win races just from day one. And the Mercedes move is part of that plan in being more serious, because they can make very good GT cars, and he obviously liked what they had on paper. And it also makes his F1 negotiations a little bit more stable, and that has been really, really crucial for Red Bull. They've actually been quite liberal when it comes to what Max does away from the track. Yes, there have been some conversations about, oh, has he been on that simulator a little bit too late because he'd been staying up past his bedtime? I still remember that diatribe that David Croft hurled toward him, and I will not forget it. And this is just yet another string to his bow. Red Bull, under Christian even, have been very accommodating. Helmut Marko even going as far as praising all the extracurricular activities that Max does. This GT3 campaign, Verstappen.com Racing, is just yet another facet of it. Red Bull's main passion for extreme sports, which has lasted for decades, really pounds exactly what Max is pounding through the Nordschleife. It's one of the most thrilling circuits in the world, and they are attached to him and his endeavours and breaking records. Would Toto Wolff tolerate these kind of things if he were to be driving for Mercedes, the F1 team? We don't know. Max doesn't know. Sure, the Mercedes supply deal might provide some sort of professional contact with Toto and Mercedes AMG, but it's too early to actually say for definite. But I certainly have a bit of a foam of doubt given the fact that Toto wasn't really that accommodating with Valtteri Bottas's nude calendars for 2025 when he was the team's reserve driver. So I can't imagine that Toto would feel really comfortable about Max doing all of this sort of stuff in GT cars where he could get himself hurt. No, Toto would want him to commit to Formula One all the time. Even though Toto was very accommodating to Lewis to allow him free rein to express himself fully, and that benefited everybody involved, I can't imagine he would be that flexible with anyone else. He's certainly not being that flexible with George or Kimi. He's certainly reigning with an iron fist. And I think he would be the same with Max. Would Max want to be that contained? No. He's getting a really good deal with Red Bull, so keep it. As long as they're remaining seriously engineeringly speaking. So is Red Bull Ford at a good enough starting block in which to keep Max Verstappen happy? Right now, I'd say yeah. Because everything that we are hearing right now from Max, from Ford, from Law, is everything that would keep Max Verstappen interested in a project. It's all technologically and engineeringly minded. They've seen real progress, people taking him seriously, and signs that rivals are worried enough to actually complain about them, and that the other team that found the innovation is the expected favourite right out of the gate. And with Ford saying they've hit their internal goals and now it's all about making sure it drives to the best of Max's abilities, that is one of the least delusional things an engine boss can be saying right now. But still, there's a ceiling on what we actually can know for sure, because the only entities that know where everybody is right now, or at least has a vague understanding, are the likes of the FIA and Pirelli, because, well, they manufacture tyres. They have to have something that works with their models to at least provide the tyres for Australia. Because all the teams are heads down, they're focused on their own work. We've heard that from every single team. Even though Fred Vasseur Ferrari's been very casual, saying, well, it doesn't really matter where we are in P1 or P10 in Melbourne, we're just not really concentrating about other people. Yeah, they don't care what everyone else is doing. They might care a little more when they have that first test behind closed doors, but it's all about how the individual progresses, because if you keep looking around, you're not looking at your own cause, and therefore you've already lost. But one thing is quite clear right now. This Red Bull-Ford Powertrains project is looking a lot more peachy than it was when Christian Horner had his name on the front door. And Max liking the engine sound, that is really not something you should dismiss. This is a really good sign that he's involved, that hey, he's a natural-born racer, and he's saying, oh, I like the engine sound, really throaty. Engine sounds really matter to petrol heads, especially when you hear people who are internal combustion engine nuts complaining about electric cars having no sound at all, although quite personally, I do love the whir of a really angry electrical motor. In fact, I would love to have a Lucid Air in my dream car collection, alongside a Jaguar F-Type and an Ariel Atom. Oh, and yeah, the Ferrari F80. And even though there are still plenty of uncertainties to be had about 2026, I think those are ones that Max can actually live with. If next year proves to have an engine which is slightly down on its peak, but the drivability is on song to Max, that could be enough to convince him to stay and contest for good results. Enough for a title threat? Again, it's too early to say, and it's for another video anyway. The only way that a Max exit would actually sound plausible and actually be tested, and we might even get an announcement so far in the middle of the season during the summer break, which is exactly when Toto would like to make an announcement, would be down to the fact that that engine would be simply undrivable. If it's absolutely horrifying, and it's something that Max has to extract everything in which to try and contest for the mid-top 10 slots, that'll be the time when Max maybe would want to itch for the exit. Or this commitment that Max has given them, and they would produce that wouldn't bode well for the future. And it might point to the fact that the first season of the brand new regulation cycle won't be one on the fact that an engine has the most grunt, but it will be down to the compatibility of that engine and the driver, because it's all about the driver. You can't just have a fast car. And Ford's main racing man proved to us in a very clear language that they are thinking really, really clearly about how well that engine drives with Max at the wheel. And if Max is genuinely embedded in that loop, and if Red Bull's culture under Mekis is pushing engineering over pantomime theatrics, then staying with them would become more rational for Max, even if the first few races are messy. A project that he actually has a lot more control than many people think. And it's the sort of control which I don't think would be afforded to him over at Mercedes. Because again, Toto had to deal with a lot of influence from Lewis Hamilton. He's not going to be dealing with that with anybody else. He won't allow the likes of George to become too big for his britches, so do bear that in mind. And what you should also bear in mind is that I have another video for you, which you can find right here. I'll see you over there after I change my clothes and warm up a bit. It's a bit cold in here.